Hey everyone, it's Beverly Hallberg. Welcome to a special pop-up episode of She Thinks, your favorite podcast from the Independent Women's Forum, where we talk with women and sometimes men about the policy issues that impact you and the people you care about most. Enjoy.
Hi everyone. I'm Jennifer Braceras, Director of IWF's Center for Law and Liberty. And today I'm joined by Anastasia Boden from the Pacific Legal Foundation. And we are talking about forced gender quotas for corporate boards. That's where the government requires either public boards or, in some cases, private companies that are regulated by the state to set aside a certain number of board spots for women. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Now, I understand that California is the first state to pass a law requiring set-asides for women on boards. And you wrote a fantastic piece earlier this month in the Los Angeles Times where you took issue with this policy. But before you tell us all the things that are wrong with the law, maybe you could tell us a little bit of background about what exactly the California law says and what it attempts to accomplish and what the requirements of that law are.
Sure. So last year, the former governor, Jerry Brown, signed into law California's women quota, which requires all public boards that are either incorporated in the state or even those boards of companies that are outside the state but have a headquarters in the state to have at least one woman on their board by the end of 2019, and then that quota will increase to at least 2 women if there's a 5-member board, and 3 women where there's at least a 6-member board by the end of 2021. So it's an increasing quota, and it has some pretty hefty penalties. You're charged a $100,000 fine for the first violation and a $300,000 fine for any subsequent violation. And every empty spot that should under this quota belong to a woman is a separate violation. And it's interesting.
So the violations accumulate each year.
That's right. Yes.
Okay. And how do they plan to enforce it? Do the companies have to file proof that they've complied, or it's just part of their regular corporate filings? How does that work?
Yeah, as far as I know, I think there's already a reporting requirement that's going to be imposed where you have to prove that you are in compliance with this with the Secretary of State's office, just like, all of the other corporate filings that go through that office.
Mm-hmm. So I guess I'm wondering if this is sort of a solution in search of a problem, right? So, I know there's still a dearth of women on, some of these corporate boards, but my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that we have been making progress in this arena sort of through the free market and over the course of time.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I think women are making gains in the absence of government intervention. They're making gains by themselves. They're lifting themselves up by the bootstraps. So, for example, between 2010 and 2015, the share of women on public boards increased by 54% globally. I think all told, women hold about 20% of board positions of corporations that are on the S&P index. It's funny because there's also been a proposed mandate in Illinois now. A bunch of states are trying to follow suit. And yet in Illinois, every single public company already complies with this sort of quota. So, yeah, I do think it's a solution in search of a problem. Yeah, voluntarily, just because women are making it there by themselves. And so when we impose a quota like this, we perpetuate a stereotype about women that doesn't exist. It says that women aren't making it to the boardroom, that they're constantly being discriminated against, even when they're not.
I wonder also if some of the reason for the disparity, the numerical disparity, has to do with choice and free choice, the same way that the wage gap exists in large measure because of the choices women make in terms of careers and wanting to pursue different avenues than men on average. Does that play a role?
I mean, you can imagine that there's some industries where there's just different interest from the genders, or there's certain companies that are maybe geared towards female products that males have less of an interest in, or maybe there's even companies that are, male groups or what have you, like church groups or things that are incorporated that may be geared towards one gender, and so there's just not an interest from the other side. You're talking about the free choices of women and how that creates disparities. I thought it was interesting that recently Uber did a study about the pay gap because they pay their employees blindly. They don't look at the gender. It's just according to an algorithm, right? So they have no control over pay choices. And yet they found out that there was a, quote, pay gap between men and women. And that was just because women tend to drive slower. They choose to drive at different times of the day. They don't feel as comfortable driving at night alone. They take fewer trips. They're not driving during times when there's, like a 3 times increase, surge pricing, it's called, on the pricing of it. So women are being paid less, and it's not because of discrimination. It's just because, we make different choices.
Right. That's interesting. I had not heard about that Uber study, and I will certainly look it up. I know there's also a study out of Harvard, I believe the business school, but I'm not sure, that looked at transportation workers, bus drivers in the Massachusetts or maybe just Boston area. They're all unionized, so they should theoretically be paid the same based on the union contract. But what they found was that women do not seek out overtime opportunities at the same rate as men because primarily they want to get home to their families. So in the end, the men end up making more, even though it's not because of discrimination.
Right, yeah. I found it interesting that Norway has imposed quotas for public boards. In fact, they have a 40% quota for women. And what they found
throughout
was...
the whole country.
Right, throughout the entire country. And what they found was not that there were all these women who were waiting to be hired and had been discriminated against. It was that actually created a shortage of qualified women. And so public companies started switching back to private to avoid the mandate because they were in search of people who they felt, were interested or qualified for the position, and they didn't want to be fined. So they found that a bunch of corporations just transitioned back to private rather than having to be subject to the mandate.
Yeah, there's always a workaround. Whenever your government passes a law, the free market finds its workaround, doesn't it?
Right, exactly.
So those are some of your policy objections, right? That you mentioned that it sort of reinforces stereotypes, and maybe that it doesn't work because there's in other countries that have tried it, there've been companies have found the workaround. But you also talk in your LA Times piece about legal objections, and what I thought was really fascinating is that even Jerry Brown, who was the governor who signed the law, said, "Oh yeah, this probably isn't constitutional, but I'm going to sign it anyway." So what are the legal problems with laws like this?
Yeah, well, the Constitution and the Supreme Court frown upon quotas like this because any time that the government makes distinctions based on characteristics like race or gender, it's really inherently offensive, even when they're trying to do it for a good reason. And part of that is because, like we talked about, it reinforces these stereotypes about the capabilities of women or of races that you're trying to help. And it's also because sometimes it's hard to even see if they're really trying to help that group or if there's some nefarious intention buried beneath it. So anytime the government makes these classifications, they subject the court, when scrutinizing a law, will subject it to very rigorous scrutiny. And that means that the law has to be narrowly tailored to some important government interest. And I think that here the law is not going to pass. As Governor Jerry Brown admitted, it's not going to pass because it's not tailored to anything like discrimination, because it applies to companies regardless of whether they have discriminated in the past, and it applies to whole industries regardless if there's any evidence of discrimination in that industry. So you can't really say it's narrowly tailored to that. And the quota is arbitrary. It's just picking a number of a hat. The government can't say, oh, we selected this number because we found this amount of discrimination and this is going to remedy it. It just picked a number out of a hat. So I don't think it's going to pass constitutional muster.
Now, is the Pacific Legal Foundation or any other group that you know of challenging this in court? I mean, are there legal cases that will decide the fate of this law?
We would be very happy to challenge it in court. You know, we have been at the forefront of fighting for equal protection before the law. We take cases like this all the time in the racial context, but here we just haven't found anybody who's willing to speak up and be a plaintiff. I think there's a lot of pressure in California, you know, to conform to this. Nobody wants to be the person to say, hey, I don't want to be forced to put a woman on my board. I think they think it'll look bad, even if they have legitimate reasons, you know, like, oh, their board size is already maxed out, or there's less interest in their industry or what have you. It's very hard to find someone willing to step up.
That is a very good point. Could a potential male board member who wasn't offered a spot, could that be a potential plaintiff? Or it would have to be the company?
Yeah. No, we would definitely be interested in looking at somebody who was, you know, kicked off their board or removed from the board in order to make way for a woman. You know, the companies still have till the end of the year to comply. So we're waiting to see kind of how it all shakes out. But certainly we would encourage somebody to call us because, you know, we exist to protect the constitutional rights of people when the government does offensive things like this. So we're very happy to consider a lawsuit.
Right. And how could somebody get in touch with you if they thought they had a claim or they wanted to try to fight this?
Well, our website is pacificlegal.org. You know, we encourage anybody to call us, to email us, to go to our website, to contact me on Twitter. You know, any which way, we're open to hearing from people.
What is your Twitter handle? We could share that with our listeners.
Yeah, my Twitter handle is Anastasia_ESQ.
Esquire, yes?
Yes, that's right.
Got it. Now, I actually live in Massachusetts, and you probably know that we have a bill pending in our state legislature that's similar to the California law. It would only apply to public boards, so it would require, you know, with the governor when he makes those appointments, to balance the gender and I believe also racial mix of the people on the boards. But so how common is this? You mentioned Illinois. I know it's happening here in Massachusetts. Are there any other states that you know of that are passing measures like this or already have?
So far, we've heard about Illinois, New Jersey, and I had heard about Massachusetts. What's interesting is California, of course, it's just a straight women quota, but in other states, there has been, it's been proposed that they add a racial component, and I thought it was interesting. In Illinois, you know, it started out that the mandate was going to be you have to have at least one woman and at least one African American. And then when the bill was going through the legislature, you know, other interest groups started haggling over, well, we want to have a spot reserved for our race as well. Yeah, and then the other group speaks up and says, no, we don't think your group deserves it. And it just goes to show how ugly and messy this is when we start allowing the government to hand out benefits or burdens based on race. You get these arguments across race lines that just, you know, exacerbate racial tensions and create animosity based on racial lines. And it was such an ugly process to see.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And you don't see that as much with gender because they're, you know, it's just women are 50% of the population. And I bet you're right that a lot of companies will just say, well, you know, it's not the end of the world. We'll just comply with the law. And we don't actually have a lot to lose in terms of, well, maybe they do have a lot to lose in terms of corporate revenue. I don't know. I don't know how it plays out. I would imagine, it's really just kind of facial, right? That it's all about marketing, and so maybe they can use it to their advantage and won't end up challenging it. But it does seem like somebody should, because it raises so many issues of equal protection, and especially when you get into the race aspect, I think it has even more serious implications.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's going to stay on the books under this, it's supposed to be some happy, nice thing. And it's exactly what Governor Brown said. He said, well, we think it's probably, has some legal infirmities, but states are not getting the message about female equality. And I guess I would ask what message it actually sends. To me, I thought it was horrible when it was passed. I was so offended when I read that the government, it's so utterly patronizing to say, here, let us help you. You're not able to do it. Let us give you a leg up because you can't make it there on your own. When in fact, I think women are capable and are making it there on their own. It confirms women's worst fears that they're being discriminated against, rather than empowering them and focusing on all they're accomplishing in the absence of a handout.
Right. Well, our listeners can read more about this issue if they go onto the Los Angeles Times website and look for your column, which I believe appeared on July 8th. And they could probably also find it on the website of the Pacific Legal Foundation. Is that right?
That's right. You can go to our blog and read more about, our work in this area and other areas of constitutional law, and check out a link to our to this article on the Pacific Legal blog.
Awesome. And I also have a blog on the topic where I quote your piece, which is on iwf.org. So we hope you learned something new from today's conversation. If you enjoyed this episode of She Thinks, we would love it if you would take a moment to leave us a rating or a review on iTunes. And please share this episode with your friends on social media. From all of us here at Independent Women's Forum, you're in control. I think, you think, she thinks.